This is part 4 of a multi-part series. I'd normally say you should watch the first few parts first, but things get weird in this one. FNaF 4, the final chapter. Ironically, despite that being its official subtitle, FNaF 4 is where, in my opinion, FNaF truly became what it was. You may notice that up to this point in the series, my job has been pretty simple, with mostly everything on the timeline being something outright described in the games, at least with a reasonable amount of detail. That all changes with FNaF 4, as this game outright uproots some things established earlier on in the series, and as you'll see, acts as a complete disturbance in the timeline going forward. To better prepare yourself for what's to come, in this episode keep in mind that it actually isn't FNaF 4 itself that rips the timeline asunder. It's really Scott's attempts to clarify FNaF 4 in the future that tears the timeline apart. Really, FNaF 4 alone actually ends up making everything more simple, but in the process, it completely rips away any satisfaction fans had with the storyline. To recap, FNaF 3 was originally intended to be the end of a trilogy, and it left off on a solid note in terms of the story. Its shortcoming, according to Scott, was that he felt the jumpscare Springtrap wasn't satisfying enough for the final entry, so he decided to work on an entry much more different for anything else that came before. In FNaF 4, it's pretty far removed from the rest of the series, at least in terms of its setting. No longer are we an employee at some Fazbear-themed location. Now we're a child living out the nightmare of having monsters stalking him at night. This game has no phone guy, nor does it have any substantial Easter eggs to mention, other than, of course, the Easter egg of Phone Guy's FNaF 1 Night 1 call being played, highly distorted from time to time. The only sources of lore in this game come from the Between Night minigames and some comments made by Scott Cawthon out of game. Just to make things simple, I'm going to have these be the only major groups we discuss, though there are a couple things to mention that exist outside of them. Speaking of which, before I get to the minigames, I'll briefly go through the important things from the main gameplay. When turning to your bed throughout the night, sometimes you can see some things appear next to the bed, such as a bottle of medicine, an IV, or a vase of flowers. We'll get into these later. After the eighth night, a short cutscene appears that just shows a locked box accompanied by the caption, "Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now." That's really it for the non-minigame stuff. Moving on to the aforementioned minigames, there are a total of 7 of them in this game, one before night 1 and then one following each night. In minigame 1, we're met with the message 5 days until the party. Keep in mind this message returns with the number decrementing each minigame up until it says 0 days until the party. Then we see a plush toy which resembles Fredbear. It says that someone locked us in our room, but it also promises that he is here with us. Then the scene changes to show a crying child with a black and white striped shirt walking around in a bedroom. The bedroom has 4 toys in the corner which resemble the original animatronics. When the child approaches them, he says, "These are my friends." It's notable that Foxy's head is torn off. Meanwhile, the Fredbear plush sits on the bed with white pinpricks of pupils peering out from the deep blackness of the plushie's eyes. These pupils always point towards us. After panning on the door a little bit, the child lays down crying, while the Fredbear plush promises that tomorrow is another day. In the second, we return to the bedroom with the plushie saying, "You know he is hiding again." Exiting our room, we enter a hall with a grandfather clock, as the Fredbear plushie mentions that he won't stop until you find him. It looks as if the Fredbear toy is somehow following us around. Entering the room on the right, we see a pink-colored room with a flower painting and what looks to be Mangle's parts scattered around the floor. To the left is what seems to be a living room. Walking into it causes a person in a gray shirt and wearing what can be presumed to be the head of the Foxy plush jumps out and screams at the child, who starts crying on the floor again. In the third minigame, we begin with the child crying on the floor of what appears to be Fredbear's family diner. The plushie mentions that someone left the child here, knowing that he hates it at Fredbear's, presumably the older brother. The plush encourages the child to run towards the exit. If you go the wrong way, the plushie says, "No, don't you remember what you saw?" When the child approaches the exit, a costume performer stands in the way, causing the plush to encourage him to run the other way, saying you know what will happen if he catches you. Turning back, reveals the scene of a purple man with a yellow badge putting the head of a Spring Bonnie costume onto somebody. Walking any further left, you can see purple shadows on the wall of what can be presumed to be Spring Bonnie and Fredbear. Then the costume performer steps behind the child, causing him to start crying and the plush to say tomorrow's another day. In the fourth minigame, we once again begin at Fredbear's with the child crying on the ground. The plush says he hates you, before encouraging the child to get up and run to the exit. Outside, a child is holding a plush of Spring Bonnie, and says that their father believes the plush has a finger trap. Further down the road, a girl tells the boy of the urban legend of the animatronics moving around at night, putting dead bodies into spare costumes. At the corner of the sidewalk sits what appears to be a teenager who laughs at the child. Makes fun of him for being scared of the animatronics, asking, "Nobody else is scared, why are you?" Even further down the road stands a round boy in a red shirt and blue pants who holds a balloon. He chuckles as he mentions the crying child has to go to the party because it's his birthday. If you walk up off the sidewalk, you can go to a playground where a child standing with 3 action figures is standing. The Chica figure has its beak off. The child says, "Why are you crying? Don't you like my toy collection?" When the boy returns home, the plush tells him to be careful. This time, you're able to turn the TV on in the living room to reveal a program date for 1983, titled Fredbear and Friends. This not only gives us a date, but may also explain how there are toys of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, when Fredbear's is still open. When the boy enters his room, the Foxy masked teen jumps out at him, and once again the minigame ends, with the plush saying, "Tomorrow is another day." In the fifth minigame, the crying child is seen locked in a room with spare parts. He begs to be let out, but nobody answers the call. This time, the plush doesn't tell him that tomorrow is another day. In minigame 6, we begin at Fredbear's once again, with the crying child surrounded by what appears to be 4 teenagers, all wearing character masks, including the character from earlier nights who wore the Foxy mask. The teens bully the child and carry him to the front stage while mocking him. They stuff the boy into the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic, whose jaws crush the boy's head. The bullies stop laughing and the cutscene ends. In the 7th minigame, the crying child sits in a void, standing opposite from his Fredbear toy, and with his other toys sitting on the far end of the screen. A message in the same color as the older brother's messages from the night before tell the boy that he's sorry. Then, messages from a pale yellow colored text appear, similar to but different from the text of the Fredbear plushie. It says, "You're broken. We're still your friends. Do you believe that?" It's Foxy, then Chica, then Bonnie, then Freddy, and then finally Fredbear disappears, saying, "I will put you back together." A flatline sound can be heard as the child himself disappears. And that's it, at least in terms of the in-game story details. As I said though, Scott Cawthon himself left several comments on the game after its release. I'll mention those now. In a Steam post discussing the Halloween DLC for FNaF 4, Scott comments on the state of the community's understanding of the lore and says the following: "I released part 4 and somehow no one, not a single person, found the pieces. The story remains completely hidden. I guess most people assume that I filled the game with random Easter eggs this time. I didn't. What's in the box? It's the pieces put together. But the bigger question is, will the community accept it that way?" One night, Scott released 3 clues on his website, Scott Games. Those clues are as follows. In the FNaF 4 minigame, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? What is seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. 4 games, 1 story. An entire other game called FNaF World was released, seemingly focused on trying to solve the mystery of the box. And no, it's not going to get its own video because I feel all of the lore pertains to this game, or sister location. So I'm just including it here, and any update to content in the sister location video. Anyways, the lore pieces in FNaF World are as follows. The game opens with pale yellow eyes telling you that Everything that happens out there has an effect in here. This is a safe place, but something has gone wrong, and it can be seen here. Something went very wrong. That is why I am here. But I won't let the same happen to you. I will put you back together. This is all written in the same color font as seen in the end of 4. The map of FNaF World resembles the anatomy of a brain. Lingering on dialogue with Fredbear for too long will cause a glitchy Fredbear to appear. This Fredbear leaves more clues as to what's going on, saying, "There's a task for you to complete. You have to leave breadcrumbs for him to help him find his way." Throughout the game, this Fredbear guides you to clocks that unlock very simple minigames, which involve you seemingly setting up the clues to the secret minigame as seen in FNaF 3. Finishing every minigame and beating the game leads to another cutscene with the yellow-eyed figure. This time it says, "We are still your friends. Do you still believe that? The pieces are in place for you. All you have to do is find them. Rest." And then the game ends. To unpack all of that, it seems there are 3 forces involved in this game. First, we have the yellow-eyed figure at the beginning and end of the game, who may also very well be the glitchy Fredbear. Then, we have the person the figure is talking to in these cutscenes, and finally, we have whatever force we play as in the main game. Given the glitchy Fredbear says that you have to leave breadcrumbs for him, and the yellow-eyed figure says that it will put you back together, this seems to indicate that the yellow eyes and Fredbear could very well be the same figure, and are both referring to the crying child from FNaF 4. It's impossible to say who either of the other figures are, but working together, they seem to put the FNaF 3 clues in place, which seems to somehow lead to putting the crying child back together. It's also hard to say what the FNaF world itself is actually supposed to be, but it seems it could very well be some representation of a coma or purgatory. We'll return to this idea later on. Speaking of which, we can finally return to our timeline. I'll indicate all FNaF 4 events with the color crimson, and every FNaF World event with pink. You may notice that our timeline is blank now, and yeah, that's because I believe at the time of the game's release, its intended story wipes the slate clean. It's interesting, in the Steam post, Scott specifically indicates that he didn't just fill the game with random Easter eggs. One weird detail, corroborated by the Toy Chica clue on Scott Games, is that despite the fact this game apparently takes place in 1983, and Fredbear's is still open, the toy animatronics are present. You could argue that the action figures the girl on the playground owns are just figures of the original characters, but it's undeniable that we see Mangle in the girls' room, something incredibly strange given we know from FNaF 2 that Mangle was a deliberate redesign of Foxy at the time of creation, made specifically for the FNaF 2 location. But I think our answer as to why things are this way comes to us in FNaF World. Quote again, "Everything that happens out there has an effect in here." If FNaF World truly is a representation of the crying child's brain, this could clue us in on something very significant. The reason why the toys are here is because as we knew them in FNaF 2, they weren't actually real. In fact, none of it was. In the minigames of this game, there's some references to characters in past games, perhaps cluing us in that they contributed to nightmares being had by the child at night. Nightmares that made up the story we were trying to solve between games 1 to 3. Let me run through each one of these sources. The main toys we see in the first minigame are the characters of FNaF 1. Notice how Foxy is damaged, just like he appears to be in every single game he's in. Also, the empty-eyed Fredbear toy sits by itself, away from the other 4 characters. This is clearly our influence for Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy, and their withered variants in FNaF 2, plus their nightmare version seen in this game. Plus, the very fact Foxy's head is missing, likely taken by the older brother, may reference the fact that in FNaF 3, one of the things mentioned to have been found is a Foxy head. As stated, the toys are likely influenced by the action figures owned by the child on the playground, and she herself may influence the rare appearances of JJ in FNaF 2, given her color scheme being identical. This is less certain, however. What is certain, though, is our influence for Balloon Boy. Remember again that at the corner of the sidewalk stands a round boy with a red shirt and blue pants. He holds a balloon and gives us a giggle as we talk to him. The child outside of Fredbear's with the Spring Bonnie toy is very likely the influence for Springtrap in FNaF 3 and Plushtrap in FNaF 4. It's very likely in the crying child's mind. The comment about the toy being a finger trap could have been misconstrued as it being a spring trap. It's always bothered me that if all the games really are nightmares, that a child would dream the characters as being robots instead of living cartoon characters, like most young children would likely perceive them. This is kind of an idea that's explored in Five Nights at Candy's 3, in fact. Even the other nightmare animatronics themselves are seen as robotic. However, this likely makes sense when you consider that inside of Fredbear's, any peek into the parts room could have likely led to Boy understanding the characters as being robots. Speaking of a peek behind the curtain, I feel like this is what the Fredbear plush meant when it says, "Don't you remember what you saw?" The child likely didn't actually see anyone get hurt, but rather, he may have just seen a worker get into costume, as we can see for ourselves. Remember that the Scott Games quote, "What's seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child." Seeing the purple silhouette of a man with a shiny badge on, helping another worker into their costume, could easily be seen as a purple man stuffing someone into a suit. This misconception isn't helped by the girl's stories of animatronics coming to life at night and stuffing people into costumes, just like what happens to Phone Guy and what he warns could happen to us in FNaF 1. Speaking of shadows, even the shadow animatronics can be explained with this theory. Through the shadows cast on the wall of Fredbear's by the stage animatronics, Nightmare likely being grouped in with them. And that pretty much covers every single major character that appears in the games. That is, except for one major player. That is, where's the puppet? Well, we've been looking at him this whole time. The constant stream of tears, the black and white stripes on the shirt. The puppet seems to be the crying child's self-insert in these dreams, giving gifts to his friends, giving them life. No stamming, as pointed out in a video by Game Theory released 7 years ago at the time of writing the script. Sitting outside the boy's real room is a grandfather clock, the sound of which we hear at the end of each night in the first 3 games. In FNaF 4, the alarm clock is more digital sounding, indicating we're sleeping somewhere other than our own room. From the Easter eggs involving the flowers, pills, and IV next to our bed, it seems that what we're being told here is that the nightmares seen in FNaF 4 happen after the bite at Fredbear's, while the other dreams came before. This may very well be why Scott mentions that the community may not accept the story as it is. To say that the entire story we've been trying to solve up to this point isn't even real in canon is really frustrating. Plus, some may call the dream plot a little bit cliché. Anyways, this is how our timeline will look now. First, Fredbear's opens sometime in or before 1983. At some point down the line, the brand gets its own show, which introduces new characters and merchandise of these characters, even though they aren't seen at Fredbear's itself. Sometime along the line, the fantasy and fun the child once experienced at Fredbear's is ripped away, as he likely witnesses a worker getting into a costume. Misconstruing this as something else, he becomes afraid of the restaurant and the rumors surrounding it. These fears lead to nightmares represented by the first 3 games of the series. This fear leads to bullying from the other kids around town, which is where our story picks up in 4 with the minigames. After a horrifying week of torment from his older brother, the little boy is celebrating his birthday at Fredbear's, before being surrounded by the older brother and his friends. As a cruel prank, the teens drag the boy to the front stage and shove him into the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic. The animatronic's jaw snaps shut on the boy's head, crushing it, and putting the boy into critical condition. This is where the nightmares of FNaF 4 likely take place. After a while of being in this condition, the foxy masked person visits the little boy, apologizing for what he did to him. This is before, of course, a mysterious voice promises to put the boy back together before he dies. In an afterlife, birthed from the boy's subconscious, the voice employs the help of someone else to put the pieces in place to help the child move on. Given these breadcrumbs match with the minigames of FNaF 3, this may indicate to us that the happiest day is still relevant to the main story. No longer is it about the 5 missing children, given they aren't actually real, but now it's about the crying child reuniting with his friends, the plushies, being able to move on once Fredbear shows up. So yeah, that really seems to be the story FNaF 1 at the time of 4 and World's release. Scott has since said he wasn't fully satisfied with how the stories were left, which likely led to the release of FNaF World Update 2 and Sister Location, which completely changed the intentions of FNaF 4 and does something much better. But I know what you're thinking. Even with the timeline established, there's still one more question I need to answer before I close out this video. At the time of FNaF 4's release, what was in the box? Well, it's impossible to say with absolute certainty, but to come to what the best possible resolution, let's use Scott clues to guide us. What's in the box? It's the pieces put together. The specific word choice of pieces is seen again at the end of FNaF World, when the yellow-eyed figure tells us that the pieces are in place for us. Remember, this is only in the ending, where you put all of the FNaF 3 clues into place. So in some way, there must be a connection between the happiest day and the contents of the box. Perhaps the box isn't even real, and more so a metaphor for happiest day. Or, if we are to assume the box is real, and at this point in the series, I think it's supposed to be, it could be artifacts pertaining to it, such as the masks of the characters. The biggest issue with this idea, though, is again, the puppet wasn't a character in the Fredbear's lineup, like the other 5 masks. Plus, Scott has admitted later down the line that the contents of the box changed over time on the grounds that the intentions of what the box was meant to be changed, as the intentions of FNaF 4 at large change. And I suppose that even once FNaF 4 was changed, Happiest Day or the character's masks could still work as valid contents of the box. Personally, I think the pieces we're looking for are a little bit more specific to FNaF 4, and the steps needed to reach the happiest day in FNaF 3. So my conclusion of the contents of the box at the time of FNaF 4's release would be the crying child's 5 plushies, the girl's 3 action figures, the child outside of Fredbear's Spring Bonnie toy, the parts of Mangle in the girl's room in the house, and finally, the balloon held by the boy at the corner of the road. All of these things are physical artifacts that led to the entire story of FNaF at this point. If the box's contents are really the pieces put together, perhaps this means it's the pieces of the story all put together in one place. But with Sister Location on the horizon, expect all of the lore, including the box, to totally change. Specifically, back to a timeline where the first 3 games are real events again. At the beginning of the video I commented that FNaF 4 and its nebulous story are what made FNaF what it is today, but that's not entirely accurate now that I look at it. The timeline is still simple. In fact, it's more simple than it was as of 3. The big problem really is that it's no longer satisfying, but by the same token, to change the intentions of FNaF 4 causes a lot of the details included within to crumble and become irrelevant, leading to this guessing game of what details in 4 are still relevant to the story at large. So it really isn't FNaF 4 that turned FNaF into the web of mysteries it is. It's future games' attempts to fix or work around the mess of what 4 was that really complicates the story. We'll cover that in the next video though, where I'll talk about Sister Location and how it totally uproots 4 as we know it. Stay tuned, because this episode was just the beginning.